kolejnym wydarzeniu w ramach CD Talks, naszego cyklu rozmów o edukacji. Dzisiaj będziemy rozmawiać o temacie bardzo nam bliskim – edukacji STEAM w polskich szkołach. Nie przypadkiem mówię polskich, ponieważ we wdrażaniu nowych narzędzi, nowego podejścia do edukacji towarzyszy szereg wyzwań związanych z tym, jak w praktyce funkcjonują polskie szkoły.
Be it especially the context in which Polish schools function. In December 2021, we have implemented a training program for teachers and educators entitled STEAM Education in School, financed from EEA funds. We have invited to take part experienced trainers from New School Oslo, that is an organization that supports and facilitates not only teachers from Norway, but also from the whole Europe. This project has been aimed at boosting the self-esteem of teachers for developing scripts and educational activities by their own, and also adapting them to their teaching practice. Today we are meeting to talk about the conclusions that we drew. Our participants did return to their respective schools, where they implemented all the things that they developed, that they programmed for their activities, all created in the spirit of the STEAM methodology or design thinking. This very step served not just the purpose for putting what they learned to practice in their respective schools. This was also something very important in terms of diagnostics. We wanted to investigate into which challenges or barriers there are for teachers en route. To another hand, we wanted to see how their students, how their pupils received these initiatives. We remember these are students and pupils who are always at the center of the educational process. So without further ado, I'd like to encourage you to listen what other speakers have to say. We're going to have participants to this project who are going to share their experiences following the implementation of the project. Furthermore, we are going to shed some light on the conclusions following the implementation of the project, what's the assessment on the part of teachers as well as pupils. And later on, we are going to have a discussion with our guests and partners from New School Oslo. But first, have a look at a quick movie that wraps up our three-day
Projekt Edukacja STEAM w szkole skierowany jest do nauczycieli i edukatorów. Realizowany przez Centralny Dom Technologii i Fundację Polskiego Funduszu Rozwoju jest odpowiedzią na ogromną potrzebę społeczną. Zwłaszcza teraz w kontekście uruchomienia programu Laboratoria Przyszłości musimy zadbać o to, aby sprzęt, który trafia do szkół, był wykorzystywany mądrze, wartościowo i żeby jak najlepiej służył celom edukacyjnym.
We designed a three-day program for Polish teachers where we really went through the design thinking process, really exploring different mindsets that are associated with the process, different ways to explore problem solving, defining problems, and then really deep diving into the process in a really practical, hands-on way. So with each day increasing the challenge and the complexity for the teachers, so they really get a real experience of what it is like to explore the design thinking process.
Było dużo robotów, było dużo projektowania 3D. Tak naprawdę grupy miały tutaj w ramach tego szkolenia dostęp do bardzo wielu narzędzi technologicznych, z których mogły dowolnie korzystać.
Mogliśmy pracować spokojnie, mogliśmy doświadczyć tego wszystkiego, czego chcemy, aby doświadczali nasi uczniowie i musieliśmy cały czas myśleć o tym, na czym tak naprawdę polega całe to działanie, a nie na swoich własnych przemyśleniach, doświadczeniach.
Najbardziej podobało mi się bardzo dogłębne przejście procesu empatyzacji. Nigdy nie miałam okazji doświadczyć tego procesu tak intensywnie i chyba to też dało mi narzędzie do tego, żeby zrozumieć, jak ważny jest ten etap w procesie design thinking.
W tej chwili przygotowujemy projekt dla naszych uczniów, czyli w tej chwili przygotowujemy dla nich takie doświadczenie w oparciu o design thinking, którego się uczyliśmy przez całe tutaj 2 dni i teraz się uczymy 3. dzień i w tej chwili przetwarzamy to jakby kolejny raz w praktykę. Wczoraj przeszliśmy przez ten proces my praktycznie, teraz przygotowujemy taki eksperyment, takie doświadczenie dla naszych uczniów.
Przyjechałam pod wpływem impulsu, widząc, że będzie ciekawe szkolenie. Potrzebuję od czasu do czasu w swojej pracy takiego powera, żeby na nowo mieć otwarty umysł, spotkać ludzi, którzy mają mnóstwo kreatywnych pomysłów. I myślę, że przede wszystkim to jest taki wiatr w żagle, to szkolenie, a przy okazji też konkretne pomoce, które na pewno zastosuję w pracy z moimi uczniami.
This has been all about the expectations and the summary of work that we had throughout this 3 very intense days. And now let us actually see what followed. Now I'd like to welcome Patrycja Janakankit from primary school number 2 in the town of Margi. We'd like to hear your expectations. Patrycja, please tell us something about your project. Please tell us a few words what your experiences are, what your impressions were, how students responded to it. And please turn your camera on if possible. We might have experienced some technical glitches with our connection. This notwithstanding, Patrycja Janakankit, welcome. Good afternoon, Patrycja. Patrycja, could you tell us a bit about your experiences following the project, following this training scheme? Can you tell us something about your impressions and impressions of the students? Because we were very curious to hear about that. Thank you for having me here. I've just run off from my class because now I'm in the middle of classes, and by coincidence it is actually their class that also took part in the project. I'm a teacher in the primary school of the town of Margi. We've got the total of around 800 pupils, and I teach 20 pupils maths. We have managed to develop and implement a project based on design thinking methodology. Let us have a look at my slides. It's already on. Well, my topic was methods of maths learning in 6th grade primary school, 4 days, 4 times per 25 minutes. It extended throughout the whole week, as 4 hours is normally what we have in the curriculum for maths, and there was also an assisting teacher to be a helping hand in this, 21 persons in the classroom. What were the goals? To search for different ways and methods of learning maths, and I've observed myself that there are difficulties learning math maths in general. And I thought to myself, this project may be something cool for students. They could share experiences how to approach maths learning in contemporary times. There is a number of different materials online. There is a great mass of different methodologies, and it's really a healthy idea for teachers to experience by themselves. I wanted my pupils to practice learning in groups. It was no problem whatsoever, as I could rely on a helping hand of my assisting teacher. So it went very smoothly indeed. I wanted pupils to become problem owners and to be able to jump at conclusions, write conclusions, and also to provide others, that is other pupils, with feedback. And this was something that I considered principal goals of my project. I started with splitting my pupils into groups. It started on Monday, and we needed to divide into groups, which we did. My method was a Scrum method that I discovered around summertime, and this is my favorite method. I love it, and I believe that blending competences is of key importance. What was it all about? All the pupils received this kind of scheme card. They got it with competences and skills. Pupils did have previous experiences with the card, so they did not have to spend more time explaining all the rudiments of these cards. Competences were split into task-related, soft and mathematical. Some went for mathematical competences, others also went for task-related and soft skills. They were to select 5 strengths. Then they needed to ascribe strength to these competences. 5 meant maximum, whereas 1 stood for something that I still consider my competence, but it was the weakest of all. Of course, it was all anonymous. I went for 4 representatives of each and every group, and every member searched for the competences that they themselves did not have. For example, if I'm quite nice, quite good at fractions, but I'm not so much seasoned in geometry, then I need to have some on board who are more seasoned in geometry, and so on and so forth. So presentation skills also matter. So they needed also to have somebody on board as a good presenter. So this kind of splitting into groups was a good way of proceeding, and this time it proved positive as well. Next slide, we've got subsequent stages in the design thinking process, so I may skip it all together. Let me just tell you what we did in subsequent days. Empathy. Working on empathy was something that happened on day 1. I introduced the topic of design thinking because the pupils needed to know why we are resorting to this methodology, that definition and ideation, that is generating ideas, coming up with ideas. Day number 4, prototyping, and day number 5, all about testing. 4 times 45 minutes was meant we were very much in a rush. But one day was, as I thought, sufficient. Empathy. What did it all concern? This was all about maths learning. But every participant did have another pupil. So we searched for solutions for those who were already starting off their experiences in the 6th grade. And they've got other Johns. One apparently needs maths, and one day he'd like to be an IT specialist in the future. Another John was different. A lazy guy delving into TikTok all the times. Third John, had a lot to catch up with in terms of maths, plus some family problems. 4th John hated maths, hated school, did not see any purpose in learning. And finally, 5th John worked on this kind of figure that they wanted to have good grades just to be allowed to play video games. A you know, a guy born into humanities. So every group did have one personality to work through. And so we landed at another stage, that is defining. Children need to define John's expectations and challenges. There were stick-ons whereby they wrote what they thought was John's biggest issue, major issue. One major issue to be selected, they were to determine the problem together. At first, they thought about it on their own, and then they went to group working and developing their approaches together. Next stage was about coming up with ideas, so-called ideation. We were considering
swoje pomysły na rozwiązanie tego problemu. Przyznam szczerze, że te dwa
And I must admit that these two stages, that is defining and ideation, proved to be most difficult. Pupils did not want to stick to their original groups. They wanted to act. Just writing on sheets of paper was something that was apparently very strenuous to them. So it was actually pretty hard, but needed. As said, pupils wanted to start acting. Next stage was very much about prototyping. Proved to be most pleasant of all experiences. I bought materials, relevant materials from my own funds. Actually, I did buy all these things myself. If I did it for the second time, I would commission my children to do it, my pupils to do it. You'll have sticks, crayons, creative tools that you can actually make something of. And children were very, very keen on using them. Have a look at pictures, just to see what they used. They used also their smartphones, especially this group that concentrated on John's the TikToker, because one task was about searching for TikTokers to actually teach maths, and I believe this procedure was very valuable. And they also engineered a list with all TikTokers who focus on maths. And a book also was of assistance. They used a manual, which also mattered a bit, and pupils were the ones to actually search actively for information.
And then a student would prepare some didactic materials made of play dough, and in this case geometrical figures, and then testing. This is the last stage, presenting. Each team had 3 minutes to present their outcomes, and it's really nice that it was time limited, exactly 3 minutes, according to a certain scheme. So first of all, read what you know about Johnny, what sort of Johnny you have to do with, because no group knew what sort of John they had to do with. Then how did you define the problem and what was the solution? And then there was a presentation, and these are several examples. On the left-hand side, a lecture hall concerning Johnny, who had problems with learning, did not have any motivation to learn and to educate himself. So one of the solutions was to give him a motivational lecture, so to indicate a teacher who offered such motivational lectures, to see that this is a bigger problem and not only related to maths. So children designed such a lecture hall where Johnny is sitting and listening to the motivational speaker. On the right-hand side, you have a visit with a psychologist, and it's a 10 zloty banknote, and he's talking to a psychologist. And there was a nice feedback from pupils. We shouldn't be embarrassed to visit a psychologist, even though this was about learning maths. It applied or involved other areas of life as well. And here children are presenting, well, on the left-hand side, they are presenting some charts, and we did not avoid this idea where Johnny takes extra classes. So the more extra classes he takes, the better the know-how. On the right-hand side, we have speed, time. This is a formula on how to calculate it, and this is a nice form of learning speed in 6th class. And then feedback. I'm glad that feedback was given by children to other children. I was there. If I had something to say, I did say it, but children only had 2 minutes to give their feedback in a specific way. So what I liked about your project, again, 2 positive comments, and the 3rd comment also positive, but it was, I would do this and this differently. So this was an exercise on how to give feedback. And I'm wrapping up because I know that we are pressed for time. What was okay? I think that an assistant teacher was something that was great. It was very useful, and I recommend this solution if it's possible to do it together, because I think it makes things easier. First of all, the first projects where we are learning are really better if someone helps you. And then date of workshops. It's good to match them to our needs and needs of students. It was right after winter holidays, so I launched it when students were fresh and relaxed. I was also relaxed. I had enough strength to run the project, and also the same applied to students. There weren't too many tests, so everybody was starting with a clean slate. And it worked really well. Breakdown into groups, Edu, Scrum. I already said that I loved it. And examples in individual stages. When we had examples of design thinking, I tried to include different examples. So this is a girl reaching out for something at the top. This is one of the examples. And we had to say what sort of problem she was facing. And there are loads of different problems. And also we had to solve the problem. So I used small pictures, small examples to explain what design thinking is about. Also a brush in the empathizing stage. So understanding the person for whom we are preparing the product or for whom we are solving the problem. Why did we use this shape for this brush? What did the producer think about? He wasn't only doing it for himself, but for a specific target group. A lot of materials. I recommend that. It's also related to STEAM. The more, the better. Kids love it. It stimulates their creativity, and a lot of fantastic ideas are generated. So I didn't want to run design thinking remotely. I wanted to do it at school. I wanted to be close to children, help them go through different stages. And also specific time frames for presenting and feedback worked really well. I had 45 minutes to complete the project. I knew I didn't want to run it in the next week. So it's important to say how many groups we have, how many time per group, plus 1 minute or 2 to warm up, and then presentation and feedback. Recommendations. Well, I think that it's important to develop such a project, implement such a project as soon as possible after the training, because you have fresh know-how, you can still stay in touch with trainers. And if you don't have any group project experience or design thinking experience, it's good to start with something you feel good about and something that students will cope really well with. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I'm glad that my project was divided into several days. After the first day, my trainer, teacher of Poland, was also design thinking expert. So when I came back home, I called her and asked her whether what I did was okay. I tried to present my doubts, and also it's important to explain what design thinking is. Maybe parents are using it as well in business. So children want to know why we are doing doing it. And you have to make sure that persona is well defined. And I had some doubts that children noticed, and maybe I didn't read it exactly when I was preparing the persona, because what it says here is that Johnny has to have good grades, otherwise parents don't let him play the computer. On the other hand, he likes books and he needs a lot of time for reading. I didn't see this, so but the kids saw this. So what do you mean? Is he playing games or is he reading books? So this Johnny, each group had a different Johnny. I'm not sure it's a good idea. I think it would be good on the first project if everybody had the same persona. We would then be discussing different solutions only. And feedback from students to students, from pupils to pupils was a good solution. And I recommend this feedback. So not just a teacher as a guru, even though I'm not a guru yet, but feedback between pupils. It worked really well. Pupils were happy to say what they would change better and what they really liked. And I guess that's all. Thank you for your attention, and I give the floor to other participants. Patricia, thank you so much, and congratulations on a great project. If you could sum up in a single sentence, what was the biggest value for you in the implementation of this project? Well, I'm really glad that I tried it out. I dragged it a little bit, dragged it out, but I'm really glad I tried to implement it. I participated in 3 design thinking training courses, but only after one with Helen and Mitch did I have the courage to do it at school. So let's not be afraid to make mistakes and try things out. You may not be satisfied with yourselves at first, but to sum up, I'm really satisfied that I tried, I succeeded, and the class was thrilled, and they keep asking me when we are going to use design thinking to work on projects. Thank you so much. Yes, the expectations of pupils grow. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have many more of such stories. Every participant implemented a project, but it's only natural that we are not able to invite everyone to share their experiences, but we collected those experiences in the form of discussions and questionnaires. And that we carried them out among pupils and teachers. And now I'd like to give the floor to Zbigniew Bujak, a didactics specialist, educator at the Central Technology Home or House, who will present global conclusions from this activity. Great, thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you, Patricia, for a great presentation of what the project was all about. Because apart from the educational layer and training layer, where we were showing how to use modern educational methods, new design methods, we wanted to do something that was rarely ever used. Namely, after the training, once we learn modern methods, how do you implement them at school? How do you do it in an efficient way, and how do you make sure that it's really a fun experience for pupils? And within the framework of our activities, we created a whole report, a publication, saying how the implementation process looked like, what it looked like. It's not a sociological report. We are talking about a group of our teachers involved in the project who were implementing it, and we focused on a control group, teachers who implemented the activities, and they shared the outcomes with us. And those outcomes were collected in the form of questionnaires as well as in-depth interviews. And we evaluated it, we collected opinions from students as well. So what about the outcomes? of this whole research process? Well, first of all, when it comes to teachers and the evaluation of the process from teachers' perspective, it needs saying that this project was a successful one. So a vast majority of cases, in a vast majority of cases, these measures were implemented. First of all, educational projects were implemented. We are very happy about it because these were not one-off workshops, but more broader educational measures and projects, workshop cycles, so to say. And they were workshops that took advantage of modern educational methods. We focus on STEAM, interdisciplinary education, not only in the area of maths, but also arts, soft competences, empathy, which was presented very well in Patricia's project, but we do not only focus on that. We are open to other methods, such as design thinkings, problematic teaching, or Edu Scrum. And you can see that in our surveys that these methods were used very willingly or mixed up, which means that we are very creative about those methods. So that's the perspective of teachers. And when it comes to weaknesses and strengths of those design methods, as we call them, or project methods, as we call them, we saw that teachers appreciated the development of future competences, key competences on the future labor market. 100% of teachers who were involved in the survey evaluated it as a great way to develop such competences. Another high score, general development of skills and changing attitudes. And to us, teachers, it's really valuable and interesting because it's the hardest process when it comes to permanent change in education. Also, when it comes to those projects, there were some problems along the way. For example, conformity between STEAM and design thinking and curriculum, and also a vast or very broad knowledge and conveying broad knowledge. And that was the purpose for us, to collect the most frequent problems and challenges and try to answer them or respond to them. So what can happen once we know STEAM and design thinking, when we start implementing them at school? What can happen? And we collected some key problems that kept reoccurring in our interviews and questionnaires. I'm not going to talk about all of the problems separately because you can read about it in our report, in our publication, but there weren't all that many problems, but they are problems that are worth paying attention to when you prepare. Because what we've seen is that the workshops were evaluated very positively by all pupils. And these are the conclusions and statistics on our report. And this is what Patricia said. Students were happy to participate, but also they expected other such lessons and measures.
And by the way, I think that the publication of this roadmap and defining all these areas that we had in the report is a good way to follow, is a good way to have in the future. Things that we got from Helen and Mitch, which you'll also find in the report, will show you how to navigate these actions in our schools. Thank you, Zbyszek, for your contribution. Just adding up, this report and conclusions will be put on our website, and you can download them very freely. And now let's have a talk on conclusions. How to be effective in implementing this methodology in our schools in Poland. So we'll have Zbigniew Bujak, but also our trainers, Mitch Whitehead and Helen Rogers. Just a quick introduction. Mitch, philosopher, and teacher from St. Louis School in Milan. Aside from working as a teacher and educator, he's also a speaker. He does also direct films and writes articles about arts and other topics. Helen Rogers is a research fellow at New School in Oslo, an experienced seasoned facilitator and educator. She's had experience in international projects in Australia, in the United Kingdom, where she conducted classes in designing digital projects, interdisciplinary projects for pupils. Helen and Mitch, a warm welcome to you. Helen, a question to you. How do you see what you had from Patrycja? What's your take on it? What's your take on what Zbyszek said about in terms of the project wrap-up? What do you think is most important of it all? What's the takeaway message? Could you please turn on the mic?
Hello, sorry.
Bardzo przepraszam.
Were you referring to Patricia's project specifically?
Both. Patricia projects. Maybe first, what do you think about
To może najpierw
I mean, what I see is exactly what we're really hoping for, which was really going into tapping into what are the needs of the students, and I really liked the exploration of these different personas and exploring different types of students that might be difficult to engage. So we really see this as really what design thinking is all about, is really connecting with your students and then having them connect with the people around them as well, and then building or designing in a user-focused way. I really enjoyed seeing all the practical elements to the problem solving. Yeah, it seemed very creative, really positive to hear how engaged the students were as well. I mean, design thinking really is, we really see it as a way of making learning more a part of something that's more real, where you're really connecting with the real world, so that the learning itself is not the focus, but rather the experience of being creative, being curious, exploring different things that the students are really engaged with. I really loved that example of the student that was very obsessed with TikTok and really bringing his interests and his engagement into that learning process. This is really what we see design thinking is all about, is exploring and being curious, and the learning comes much more naturally and in a fun, experiential and creative way.
Thank you very much. What I find interesting is how technologies were used in this creative manner. So TikTok is not just a space where we waste our time and consume. TikTok is taken advantage of for educational purposes. And now, from the perspective that we can consider more global, if we look at conclusions from this report that Zbyszek already addressed, what would you say about the challenges in these projects? Mitch, can you say a few words about these challenges?
I think the challenges that the participants we've heard from have mentioned are challenges that we hear from a lot of participants in a lot of different countries. They're often challenges around finding the time or the resources needed to put things into practice. They're challenges around finding peers or colleagues to work with, and also challenges around aligning with their existing commitments or curriculum demands. These are very common challenges. Of course, every teacher would like to rebuild the curriculum from scratch to teach exactly in the way that they want to. but we're always caught between different demands and challenges. I think one thing to say is that it isn't the case that we have to do everything possible. A complete, full, rich, new curriculum would be brilliant. But if we can only do parts of it, moments of it, certain aspects of it, those can still bring value. Thinking about ways we can take things that we're currently doing and maybe reframe them or rework them to fit these new methods or tools. And also staying in communication with people that you meet on a workshop or online communities who can also offer support and guidance and a kind of peer community can be really, really valuable as well. I think we always have to remember that whatever change we want to bring is probably going to happen slowly, but that it's important to do this incrementally, to try and introduce little parts here and there to slowly build up over time. And that change will come, but it's something we often have to be patient about. And that's very hard when we can see what we think could be really good new ways of doing things.
Thank you very much. And now I question to Zbyszek. Would you like to add something on challenges? Some challenges that might have popped in the report and were not stressed enough? And you are an educator in the Polish system, right? You've got your experiences. Is there any particular barrier for projects to be put to practice, to be rolled out? There were two challenges that I stressed in my presentation. That is this critical approach to modern methodologies, how things can be reconciled with the core curriculum. That's thing number one. And thing number two, how can we convey as much content as possible based on these methodologies? These are two challenges that were not surfacing immediately in the questionnaires. They did surface when I asked further questions. Another challenge is, and this is a question that I very often ask, is there something that we've been missing in the report? Maybe there is something that we should include as well. And lately, one of such major challenges has been modern technologies, high-tech. It is vital still. None of our teachers pointed to this being a problem, to this being an issue. Is this really not a lack of deficit in our schools with modern technologies? Or maybe for our group of teachers, it was not a problem at all because they were already engaged in modern educational approaches, very much aptly navigating into the world of modern technologies. For some teachers, modern technologies may not be a challenge, but for other teachers, for some schools, technology, tools, especially tailored for the needs of STEAM working, may constitute a challenge. Under other circumstances, we may have tools because we've got a new program to be rolled out, right? But at the same time, there is still a shortage of knowledge in and around a certain tool, how a given tool can be taken advantage of for a given educational activity. And here is where STEAM enters, where STEAM can be very beneficial. And I believe STEAM can be very well reconciled, up to a certain degree, of course, with the core curriculum and how we usually convey knowledge. For me, as an educator, the biggest benefit is to have an education which would be focused on very tangible problems. It is also linked with a situation when students feel they need some knowledge, they need to sort out a given problem, and therefore they require to discover something. And that's the kind of potential that we can untap as teachers that may be very beneficial for a given stage in the educational process. This can come naturally, of course, but my experience says that it's something that pupils very well embrace as they grow curious about it. and this is also linked with a very successful rollout of the project. So it's good to have all these things made upside down. In the first place, we communicate a problem, then we practice, and then we come at a solution, at a moment in which we get knowledge to have this solution ready. Yes, indeed, there's been a number of challenges in the report. And now a question to Helen and Mitch. You're experienced in projects, educational projects. You very much support the growth of educators all across Europe. And now my question is, could you tell us, could you give us a few recommendations to people who'd like to follow this path? So patience was recommended already. Support of other people is also needed, as Patricia very well stressed. Are there any other remedies? Are there any other recipes? Are there any good practices that you could provide us with? Anything would be very valuable here.
I think something that can take a lot of pressure off from people is to remember that a lot of these methodologies are about focusing on the process. The students are undergoing a very particular process that helps them develop skills and competencies, and it gives them a particular experience, a particular feeling. The outcome of that process is often much less important than going through the process itself. So what that can mean is that some of the pressure we might feel around taking risks, trying new things, trying new technologies, that can be quite reduced, because if things do go wrong, it doesn't really matter because the process is still valuable, exploring that process with students. And when things do go wrong, opening that up to students to talk about, to explore together. That way they're still gaining from that process. If the end result isn't a total success, well, that's okay, because the value really comes from the process. That can take some of the stress and some of the anxiety away from us as teachers or practitioners and encourage us and our students perhaps to take some greater risks.
Indeed. When working with pupils, there's been one important element for our work with pupils. Namely, at times there is a kind of barrier on the end of pupils. They are not sure, they are not convinced, they are withdrawn. They are not eager to participate. Helen, have you ever been confronted with these kinds of problems? Have you ever experienced this kind of issue? Or maybe you know what can be done for students, for pupils to feel encouraged, to feel engaged? Because, of course, this is a totally new approach to this relationship between teachers and pupils.
Yes, it is. This is something that's a really important component that teachers are really looking to develop further in, is how can we engage students, especially with the way students are engaging in the world now with technology. This is becoming an increasingly bigger challenge for teachers. From my perspective, I think really, and something that we are big advocates for, is how do we find ways to empower students to lead themselves in their own learning? And this is probably the most important shift in the way that we think about education, is rather than the teacher being the one who's at the front of the class, who's directing the learning and instructing the learning, we're actually flipping the script, so to speak, and having and thinking, how can we empower our students to be engaged in their own learning? And to do that, it's really meeting those students where they're at. What are they interested in? What are they passionate about? And finding ways for them to reflect more on their own learning process, how they learn themselves, and then with the support of teachers, actually creating activities and structuring educational time as a way for students to explore themselves, both in how they learn and then how they can explore the things that they're interested in, and use that time to really go into their passions and into their interests. I really believe that even though this might seem like quite a radical way of rethinking education, I do very firmly believe that we can still develop the skills that are most important, like literacy and numeracy, through these avenues where we're really talking with students in a different way about their education, so that we really can develop lifelong learners in all of our students. And this is what we're really in this for, is, you know, education doesn't finish at the end of your schooling, it's for your whole life. So how do we really instill that mindset and those skills from an early age?
Thank you so much. Yes, that's the question, and that's the challenge everybody is working with. Zbyszek, what's your take on this? I fully subscribe to what Helen said, namely, what is key is student participation, student involvement, independent involvement and engagement. And in our report, we answered this question by quoting a tool that could be very useful for teachers, namely Participation Ladder by Roger Hart. And this is a tool which we can use to analyze or to look at different stages of education, analyzing children engagement in the implementation. And Roger Hart's ladder has lower parts, activities that are not very participation oriented, engagement oriented. So children will be encouraged to do something by a teacher. I don't want to say forced to do something, but these are activities where children play a role, and Hart says a role of a token. So it's tokenization. In other words, children are there without getting very much engaged. The higher we are on the ladder, the more engaged children are. They define goals, they define the problem, and at the very top of the ladder, we have a project which starts with the problem through to full analysis, which is done by students and processed by students. But this ladder, it's not just a stick. It's not enough to tell students, to give them a big challenge and just tell them, I'm sure you'll do it by yourselves. Sometimes we succeed, yes, sometimes pupils will not trip even once and will do a great project, but other times they will need some help. And here, showing this tool as a ladder, as a place with stages where you can gradually climb up using more and more developed participation methods, can be very useful in the educator's, trainer's role. Because thanks to this, a bigger part of the educational process is given back to students, to pupils, and thus you can create internal motivation to act. Thank you so much. Now, when it comes to evaluation of our training program, I have to mention some challenges that came up in the context of remote education. So at the end of our conversation, because we are pressed for time here, at the end of our presentation, I'd like to ask all of you the following question. What do you think about implementation of STEAM projects, projects that engage students, design thinking in remote teaching? because we still use remote teaching, and our teachers, even Patricia mentioned that she was waiting to implement the project at school. And is it possible to do this online as well, or not? Helen, what do you think? What do you think about it?
I mean, I'm thinking specifically about design thinking. I think it can definitely be something that can be implemented online. It is a challenge to really think about how can we. The biggest challenge of online learning, of course, is keeping students engaged, and it is a really difficult thing to do. But we do feel that there are ways in which you can shift the types of activities and shift the way that students collaborate so that they are actually still maintaining a lot more engagement. And really, we can see online learning as a way of really dialing in to specific skills such as independent learning. So quite often we like to explore ways in which we can actually create more learning experiences that are done offline in the real context, and then using the online learning or the coming together in a synchronous way as a form of coaching. So this is just one way of looking at how we can change the way we do online learning. So rather than just having a bunch of little faces in front of you and trying to teach in this traditional way, we're actually really thinking about how can we encourage students to be really tuning in and engaging with their immediate context, and then using different reflective processes and coaching processes to enhance their learning experience. So this is just one way of looking at online learning. But I recognize it is a very difficult challenge, and it's something that we really see a need to explore on a much deeper level and really find what specific tools and skills we need to develop to really bring online learning further.
Sure thing. It's probably also dependent on the age of pupils, on the subject, or on the topic we want to work with. Zbyszek, what's your experience in this area? Well, I have to agree that it was a big challenge also to teachers that we worked with on the project. When I called them up, I asked some questions, I was collecting data, and also based on the surveys, I know that remote learning, online learning, also often it happened overnight, and it was a big challenge. And it would block the process very strongly at certain points in time. But then, and then the process was a challenge. But what I would suggest is to take a different perspective. So, yes, sure, maybe design thinking or STEAM would be easier to implement and more fun to implement at school physically. But on the other hand, since we are in the middle of online learning, I think there's no better way, no better method than using project methods, design thinking, STEAM, which engage students. So instead of being a teacher who's just delivering what we actually were doing online, where teachers were just delivering know-how to pupils. And we can turn this around. Suddenly, pupils can work in groups, in rooms. They can do something together. We can also take advantage of the internet tools to do that, and to construct, to prototype, to design, and there are more and more such solutions. And also, from our perspective of the Central Technology House, which has been implementing STEAM workshops online for a very long time now, and classes from all over Poland can subscribe or enroll. And I have to honestly say that we think our method will not suffer online. And on the other hand, we get opinions from pupils that, yes, it's online workshops, but they are very valuable and they see them very positively. And our pupils enroll very often and they often come back. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, slowly, we have to wrap up. At the very end, I'd like to ask our guests to say one sentence of a comment or recommendation after our training. What would you like to convey to the participants? What surprised you the most, maybe, when you were implementing the project? Or what would you like to draw your attention to?
I would draw attention to the willingness to try new things. For a lot of these teachers, this is new to them. They're doing it because they're interested, because it's exciting. And they're aware that it might be difficult, it might not be totally successful, but the willingness and the desire that comes from, I think, just a curiosity, that is incredibly valuable and will probably carry them to success more than anything else, I think.
Yeah, and to build on that, you know, what I saw during that course was, what I experienced was just how much experience there was in that room with all of those teachers, how much creativity there was. It was really, it was very inspiring, and I guess, for me, just that gives me a lot of hope and a lot of optimism about what teachers are doing today in terms of making learning more engaging and enriching for their students. My recommendation would be to for those teachers to stay connected with each other and keep the conversation going, and also find allies in your schools. So that's people who share a same willingness and enthusiasm for what you're doing, and really form little teams together, you know, where you can really explore and experiment further, because I think really the teachers that we worked with, that's the future, and it's very exciting.
Thank you so much, Zbyszek. Yes, I fully agree with Helen. Namely, the recommendation that often appeared here to create teams, to look for allies in our activities. We often heard it from teachers. And let me end with the second most important recommendation from perspective of teachers that concludes our report, because we always ask teachers who are implementing measures about the best advice that they would give to other teachers who are thinking about implementing such a thing. And this recommendation was very easy. Namely, all the questionnaires said that the main piece of advice would be just to try it out. And I think this goes to show that we talk about project methods, learning on your mistakes, giving yourself and children some space to test things out. At the same time, as educators and teachers, we often forget about it. To give yourself a space to make mistakes, to test something, to be relaxed. We always like to have something under control. Perfect. Maybe on the first project it doesn't have to be so perfect. Maybe it's worth to see this as an educational journey you embark on with students, where you have a roadmap in the form of our report. So an educational journey with process at heart, what Mitch said. So a process where we can let go of some of the pressure and treat it as a journey, adventure through which we will go together with our students. And then I can guarantee you that it's going to be a phenomenal process for them and yourselves. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mitch, Helen, thank you so much. Zbigniew, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for bearing with us. And this is our conclusion. Learning is a process that takes flexibility. Each school, class, each pupil is different. So we, as a central technology house, propose is to combine humanities-oriented approach with technology. In other words, we're creating scripts, ready-made projects, but in fact, what we really care about is about supporting teachers so that they feel competent and strong enough in order to adapt these tools to their goals. Laboratories of the Future, launched last year, offered schools a lot of new technological solutions and tools. And our role is to teach you, to support you in creative, valuable use of those tools. So you're kindly invited to follow our channels where we'll regularly share knowledge. You can download the report that we talked about today. And for now, thank you so much for spending time with us. I wish you all the best in those difficult times because our pupils need time, need support and attention. So thank you and goodbye.